Morning, good evening. Welcome to week 2 of PSHS 6240 here at George Washington University's School of Continuing Studies Homeland Security program. I think we're started with the course. I hope you had a good intro this past week. I think we've got people late to register and stuff, so I understand if there's issues getting the first assignment in, but I just want to make sure, we should be good from here on in. Announcements. Just, again, I mentioned this in the earlier, but 14 May at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is the first presentation. I will be giving a PowerPoint with this presentation with this YouTube video that kind of shows what I want with the presentation, what kind of stylistic points, and then you'll have a lot more guidance as we go through week 2 to cover down. So I recommend focusing on week 2 so you can absorb all the information and then over the weekend or next week start working on presentation and paper. And again, week 1 or assignment 1, it'll be group 1 doing the briefing at 14 May, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you can't have everyone make it, that's fine, but at least have one person so they can answer the questions for that briefing. I understand there's time zone issues and other problems, but I just want to make sure at least someone's there. For everyone else, it's optional. If you have questions on the paper, I recommend you go to the briefing, and I'll send out the WebEx link. Or if you have just questions on the class, those are kind of office hours, and we can talk in depth there. So 14 May, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For everyone else, if you're in groups 2 and 3, the paper is due 17 May 2020, 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So just make sure you get your paper in then. Keep up the effort. I really liked what I saw on the discussion boards for week 1. Everyone's very enthused, usually the first week, and then kind of the effort sometimes drops off. Please don't let that effort drop off as we go forward. Many of the videos are online that are recommended in the syllabus. I just want to, next week you have the Netflix, which is not online, the 70s. But then the following week you have Road to 9/11, which is online. Some of the other videos are all online. I just want to caution the DVDs out there, but as long as they're on YouTube or online, unless they get taken off in the next few weeks, which has happened, most of what you'll see is on YouTube. And then current events. As I'm speaking now, many of the states are opening up from COVID-19. We can debate whether this is a good idea or bad idea, but certainly people are making a cost-benefit analysis when they're doing it. And just like we talked about a cost-benefit analysis this past week regarding terrorism, states are going through that same analysis going forward. And people are saying, well, people are going to die when states open up. That's part of the calculus. But is it worth the massive unemployment that we're going to face? In fact, I'm looking at numbers of a 20% reduction in GDP that's been thrown out, 25, 30% on level of unemployment, which is what we had in the Great Depression. And states are making those trade-offs. We can debate if that's a good idea or not, if those lives that they're going to lose are worth the economic gain that will happen. But just keep that in mind, is that the same calculus that we talked about terrorism before is going on right now with COVID-19. And I don't think you can have an answer for that, because you have to ask these existential questions, these issues surrounding what is a life worth and how much should we be concerned with life versus economic welfare and those types of issues. So, is terrorism an existential threat? That's what we've been kind of asking for, or hopefully thinking about this past week. And you can argue yes and no. I gave you my answers in the lecture. And again, my personal opinion is those factors when you talk about comparing terrorism to car accidents or medical accidents or any of the other policy issues that I talked about is kind of a false equivalency. And I do that for several reasons. One, terrorism has a psychological impact, more so than anything else. We can argue if that's fair or not. We can argue whether we're doing it to ourselves. But let's be realistic. If someone dies on the Beltway here in D.C. in a car accident, I'm not going to stop traveling or driving to work the next day. If 2 people do that, I'm still not going to drive. If 5 accidents happen on the Beltway in one day, that's still not going to have enough of an impact on me where I'm going to not go to work the next day because of fear of vehicular accident. Terrorism obviously does have that larger psychological impact. And we could debate whether it's self-inflicted or not. But I'll throw this kind of analysis to you. If there was on Monday, when school happens, if there was school happening, and terrorists attacked a school bus, how many people would put their kids on a school bus on Tuesday? If terrorists attacked a school bus on Monday and Tuesday, how many people would put their kids on a school bus on Wednesday? If terrorists attacked Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I don't think anybody would put their kids on a school bus on Thursday. I don't think schools would be running on a Thursday if that were the case. Even though the probability of something happening to your child on that school is less than a car accident or less than any of those other issues we talked about. That's the psychological impact, and we could debate whether it's self-inflicted. Again, terrorism can impact our way of life. And again, it's the second and third order effects that we are now seeing because of COVID-19. I talked about the school example. Well, it's if we have to cancel schools, as many of you are impacted, that impacts everyone from I can't go to work because I can't take care of my child, to a child can't get their school lunches because they're on a lower socioeconomic status. So there's cascading impacts based on what terrorism does that can impact our way of life. And that's the fear. And if you don't think that school bus issue is big enough, well, then let's raise the ante. What about a terrorist using WMD? What about a terrorist using a mass cyber attack where we can't access our banking information or any of those critical parts of our day-to-day life? That's what terrorism can do. Those other issues, whether it's vehicular accidents or medical errors or bathtub drownings, will not impact our way of life. And then finally, we got to ask, what's in our control? Again, we're less likely to view heart disease as an issue that kills far more people because we have some control over it. We have some control over vehicle accidents. We can drive a safer car. We can drive slower. We can drive sober. We can do many things to mitigate the risk of any of those other policy issues. For terrorism, we don't have that control, which is why I think it has the larger impact. So that covers kind of week one. There's no exam on week one, there's no final and stuff, but these issues are going to weave their way through the rest of the course. So I want to have them in the back of your head. So week two, history. Terrorists, we're going to talk about terrorism history. We're going to talk about 4 waves of terrorism. And one impact I want to just get in your heads before we start this week is the use of communication for terrorists, whatever communication medium of the day. Terrorists take advantage so that they can get their message off. At least good terrorists do. And it's not a cliche or not too far from the truth to say terrorists are fundraisers and marketing folks that occasionally kill people. And that's actually quite accurate. And what you see here is, and you're going to see some of these groups go in more detail, but how these groups use the mass media today to advance their message. And the first is the Irgun, which you'll read about in Israel right after the Second World War. They used teletype photography to get their message out. Prior to World War II, if you wanted to get a photo out, it was You take the picture, you developed it, you mailed it, and then 2 weeks later it would appear in a newspaper. Teletype photography has allowed the D-Day landings to get sent out the next day over wire service. It was essentially the YouTube of the day, and the technology was advanced during World War II, and it was used by terrorists after World War II to get their message out. This was you can see two people hanging. I know the picture is not the best, but this picture was shown in newspapers throughout the Western world. Again, they used the YouTube of the day, the instant messaging that teletype photography had to get their message out. Second is Black September. Some of you might be more familiar with this. This was the attack on the 1972 Olympics in Munich by Palestinian terrorists. And this was, the technology was 24-hour news, color TV, which was just pretty nascent in 1972, just coming of bounds. And they knew that they would get massive coverage if they attacked the Munich Olympics. And that's what Black September did. And I would argue that, we talk about an Israeli-Palestinian peace process and Arab and Israeli peace process. We would not be talking about that if it weren't for terrorism committed by Palestinians, which tells you how good their messaging is and how well their plans essentially came to fruition in many respects. And that's Black September used the 1972 Olympics to get their platform out. And then finally, ISIS. I think most people are familiar with this. They definitely use the social media, YouTube, Facebook, Telegram, to get their message out. When you see this picture here, and many of you might remember the beheading of James Foley, they knew, you think it's brutal, and it certainly was, but the guy who's doing it knows that he is going to get massive clicks the more brutal he is. And he's going to get massive exposure to ISIS the more brutal he is. So that's how, again, terrorists have taken advantage of the communication medium to get their message out. And just going, again, preview for readings. The Hoffman, chapters 1 through 4, shouldn't take you more than an hour or so to read. And then the 4 Ways of Terrorism is another half hour. CNN, the 70s, is the Netflix video on Wave 3 terrorism that occurred in the 1970s. And then One Day in September, that's optional. I talked about it a second ago about the 1972 Olympics. If you can watch it, it's a good flick if you can find it out there. But I'm not going to require it for next week. And then the Vox article on what is terrorism, what is not terrorism, and that's vital into feeding your next paper topic or your first paper topic on definitions of terrorism. And then the lectures. Terrorism History Part 1. It'll cover the history that I kind of alluded to just a second ago. And then the second lecture, my favorite, which leads into the paper and into your discussion section. What is terrorism? What isn't? Why do we consider certain acts terrorism and others not? What are those criteria that fold into terrorism? And what is it? Why would we think about it maybe as a criminal act or even an act of liberation? So those are the questions for this week. If there's issues, let me know, and I look forward to your discussion board.